right. Good morning, everyone. I am Erin Livingston. I work here at HGAC, and I'm happy that you have joined us this morning for our Strategies for Debris Management Challenges webinar. You should see a poll on your screen, so please do go ahead and take those questions. We're going to answer those questions. We're going to leave it up for a little while during all of the introductions and everything so that you have time to do that. It just gives our presenters a chance to get to know who's in the room, who they're talking to, and just for us to kind of know how prepared our region is, or the people that are attending at least are how prepared y'all are. We are going to have everybody muted throughout the webinar this morning. If you have questions, just type those in the chat. We are going to be monitoring those throughout, and they will answer those as soon as we see them. If you are watching this webinar in a room with multiple people, please go ahead and type all of the names in the chat just so we can accurately capture everybody in attendance this morning. Also, we are recording this webinar, and we will also have the slides available. So you'll be able to view the recording or just look at the slides later on, or share them with a colleague if you choose to do that afterwards. We'll make those links available to you afterwards. And I'm going to go ahead and kick it off or kick it over to our presenters. And I don't know if it's John or Brian or Nick's going to talk first. John, okay, I'm going to turn it over to you. So,
thank you, Erin, and thank you everybody who are all on the HGAC team for sponsoring this and putting this together. Without your leadership and stewardship of bringing these type of topics to the forefront, it provides that place for communities to learn more and really increase the span of knowledge, because Lord knows we need it here in the Houston-Galveston region, as well as just the entire state of Texas. And so I got to tell you, I am extremely excited to be here. The number of participants continues to rise. I see we've got over 75 individuals or teams who have signed up for today's presentation on disaster debris management. So, I love this time of year. Okay. It's that start of hunting season. You see the doves flying, you see the trucks going west on I-10 over the weekends. You see there's just that hint of different air that comes in, and we're now in late summer. We're going to be in late summer in a few weeks. We got football season back up. The kids are back in school, and really, this is that time to be in peak hurricane season. Okay, I mean that's what this means, is that you see that bell chart. It looks like a fire. It's orange and red. I'm sure you've all seen it posted somewhere, but we're not even in peak hurricane season, and we've already had a derecho. We had severe weather in April and May, and a hurricane that impacted the Houston-Galveston, really the entire state of Texas, has been touched by severe weather, and many of those counties are challenged with debris management. And so, what is nice, and I just saw it on X, Twitter, whatever your method of social media that you use, or news media for that matter, is the fact that the tropics are quiet, that things are quiet right now. And I think this is a great time to have today's webinar, because I'm a procrastinator. I'm a habitual procrastinator. I don't do much better, things better than procrastinating. And what I'm saying today is, take this opportunity while you've carved out 2 hours to break that habit, break that cycle, and really listen, talk about things within your organization, jot down notes, and hey, you're on your computer already. So if you need to fire off an email, you need to send a Teams chat, or you should, to that other person, because we've struck a chord with you. We've got you thinking, and maybe we use this time to really effectuate that change. And so, hey, if you need to send a Teams message, you need to send that email. Brian, Nick, and we are perfectly okay with you doing that, because if I don't sit there sometimes and write that email when it's in my head, it doesn't get done. So listen, the phrase I like to use is, if not, then who? And if not now, then when? And so what I'm saying to you here is, when we're going through debris management, I really want you to take this opportunity while you're sitting at your desk, listening to us talk. Just go ahead and get better prepared for your community again while we're in the height of hurricane season and while we're on this webinar today. So with that, next slide, Brian. Thank you. I want to go over the brief agenda that we have today, but first I want to do some introductions. My name is John Burry. I'm director of our post-disaster programs here at Tetra Tech. I'll be helping facilitate today's discussion. And like I said, we're really excited for you all to be here. I've been able to serve HGAC communities in the Houston-Galveston region, many states across the U.S., in planning for and recovering from debris generating events. I've had the pleasure of assisting communities after tornadoes, hurricanes, ice storms, wildfires, you name it. I've had to face that challenge alongside our clients. And so, we hopefully will be able to bring that perspective here to today's presentation. Next, I'll let Nick Russo introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Nick Russo with Tetra Tech. I do a couple of different things here, but I work on our environmental projects that are post-disaster related. And then I also work with a lot of our communities in Texas on their debris management or, projects and disasters that may come up and impact their communities. And I would say over the last 20 years, I've worked or participated in a lot of, actually most of the disaster-related impacts in the Houston-Galveston region. So glad to be with you all today again as part of our series. And I hope you, like John said, I hope you get something out of it, and it helps you to communicate some of those challenges within your organization.
Thanks, Nick. Brian, our old friend here. Brian, thanks so much for being here today. Brian and I have worked together for over 15 years. Brian, you want to do a quick introduction?
Sure. Brian Rutherford with Tetra Tech. I've been with Tetra Tech for about 16 years. I have also done a response to quite a number of disasters, hurricanes, floods, wildfires. I do a lot of planning. So I'm more of a planner type person, and I've written plans for disaster debris management plans for jurisdictions in Texas and around the country. So kind of seeing what works with some jurisdictions and what can go horribly wrong at the same time. So glad to be here with all of you today.
Perfect. And thank you all for participating in today's poll. You should have seen that pop up when you join. It helps us as presenters take a look at that during some pauses and help us better understand the individuals that are here today, or the groups, and what level of preparedness, what level of experience and that you all have. And so we can help, again, really hopefully tailor on the fly and provide you with some good information. So today, let me go over the agenda of today's presentation. Number one, we're going to be talking about staff turnover and some tips, some challenges that they present, as well as some tips for overcoming them. Number two is finding qualified contractors to support your organization in debris management, some steps that you can take. And another thing is maintaining those good relations with those contractors. How best to do that in off season as well as during a disaster. Then we're going to be talking about a very timely topic, which is social vulnerability and social justice, how that plays into debris management operations. And finally, we're going to wrap up today's webinar. We're going to wrap it up around noon Central with a focus on public information and some of the tools that have been rapidly changing year over year, really month over month, it seems, and how those can be integrated into your debris management operations. So thank you, Brian. Thank you, Nick. Brian, let's dive into the staff turnover and some of the challenges that it faces. Well, Brian's pulling that up. Next slide, please. This was a great study that we found in preparing this to better to really describe, what are those challenges and at what level that communities are facing. I mean, everybody says, oh, it's hard to staff. Finding good people is tough. But really, it is that operator level and supervisor level where communities, especially in the public sector, are finding it difficult to staff and then maintain that staff. So whether it's sheriff's deputies, the paramedics, the IT personnel, 911 operator, all of those are highlighted in this governing article. And really, that is a clear example of something that we've seen when working with communities the last couple of years in debris management operations. Again, another thing, big turnover. Communities are seeing turnover twice the 2x what we've seen in the average of the last decade or so. And some communities have over a 25% turnover. Again, communities are trying to combat that by raises and other challenges. But again, when it comes to debris management, it's a reality. So one of the things, again, we did, next slide, please, when we were discussing this is, again, baby boomers are retiring, people not returning to work. This idea of a remote environment for a lot of our staff, competing with private sector companies, especially in the trucking industry. If you look at the Amazons, the UPS, a lot of those, you've seen some of the articles here in the Houston area about the garbage truck drivers and some of the competitive wages there, the turnovers, inexperienced staff, and inexperienced leaders. So when we, again, talk about this in terms of debris management, I started thinking back to kind of the highlight reel of disasters in the HGAC area. You have an Allison in 2001, a Ike in 2008. You had, some floods in 2015, 2016, as well as Harvey in 2017. Now here we are 7 years later with the May and April severe weather, as well as the derecho, as well as Hurricane Beryl. And so, again, that's about a 7-year clip. 2001 Allison, 8 was Ike. You had 17, a couple of years, but, had some other smaller disasters that certainly impacted a sizable population and had a significant debris consequence. And now here you have derecho and Beryl. So I was thinking back and saying, hey, how many of us, how many out there were here during those disasters? And it's really surprising to see that turnover and understand that people are new to debris management. So next slide, please, here. And quite frankly, again, we look at our 7 or 8 year clip, and I think Francisco Sanchez, formerly with Harris County Office of Emergency Management, and now with SBA, had stated a statistic that said that Harris County of the state of Texas gets a disaster declared every 9 months. So we are certainly a microcosm of the number of disasters and that rise. Next slide, please, Brian. So again, some of the challenges here that is the clear stuff. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. Maybe they haven't worked in disasters. Maybe they're from Iowa and they haven't had to face a debris generating event or a hurricane. Maybe it is staff and elected officials, especially at that management level, who aren't as familiar about how a first pass debris operation. I know, Nick, you've been working with a lot of communities one-on-one, especially the last few years. I mean, what are some of those challenges that you've seen the debris manager face and how they've looked at that?
Thank you. one of the things on this slide we might want to think about, and if the audience, if you want to use the little reaction, it shows up like a heart, but you can pick some other buttons to push. But if you could like push a button if you're working with a team that is responding to Beryl right now, I'd like to see just some quick little, to know who's got active projects right now. But if you do, I would say one of the challenges that we've seen that John was talking about is a lack of experienced resources at different levels. And so that could be, let's say the departments we usually see that are involved in debris operations are solid waste departments in cities, as well as, working with your emergency management office. But then the rest of the picker-uppers and managers, if you will, are going to be those public works staff, road and bridge departments in the Texas counties and that sort of thing. So it's a combination of, your operator staff, the people that are kind of running that type of equipment. And if they, and we've seen that, looking back at past events, the people get their experience from the actual work experience itself, right? You can't really take a training course on how to manage, how to real world manage debris, a disaster response in the state of Texas. So maybe we could try to create one that does that, but I don't know. It'd be maybe a reality TV show. But it's a combination of, the workers, the operators, and then at the management level, people who know how the contracts are supposed to work, or they had that experience. The folks in the communication side that have dealt with how to talk to the affected communities in that disaster and response scenario, and then even your management at the top. And the last one that I would say is the elected officials, and we kind of touched on it, but elected officials that have not, obviously they come in, they change frequently, right? And it's not a right or wrong process. It's just something that naturally occurs. And so if you haven't had a disaster or a debris generating event in your community in a while, and then you have a new batch of elected officials, they obviously have naturally a response and a learning curve to reflect back on, well, how did we do it before, and what were the issues? And so when you take all of those together and you put them in a little box, they just it's a constant challenge to overcome. And I would say that's what we see it not only in the Houston-Galveston area region, not just in Texas, but literally it's in all of the Gulf Coast states and nationwide. It's something actually that, in preparing for this talk, we reached out to some of our other regional program staff and really just had this conversation. We had a conversation about what types of things come up when we're talking to these communities, and this was like number one on the list. It's finding the new people to train or to work with, to say, hey, what types of challenges are you facing in your organization to prepare? And so it's things like that we really want to try to improve on, especially with this audience, but definitely across the U.S.
That's great, Nick. Thank you. And again, I think those of you who are out there listening today, talking through the scenarios, just thinking through those scenarios and identifying those staffing needs. Who's your core team? Again, hey, you know what? Everybody's got two screens here. Put us on one screen on the right side and bring up a Word document on the left side and just start jotting that down. Hey, it's Marianne, it's Dave, it's Jerry. Those are that's my go-to core team in charge of, response. And then this is, these are my backups, and understand who's that team that's going to really hit the ground running the first couple of days of the disasters. Who are your folks that you've got on speed dial and really can be that team that is going to get this program up and running. Next slide here, Brian. There is also, some strategies that you can employ for reassigning staff and cross-training staff. One thing we've seen is call-up lists of retirees. We've also seen, again, involvement in other departments that have historically not been involved in debris operations. That may be in areas like public health, especially given their response and engagement after the COVID-19 pandemic. Being able to integrate those types of teams will help broaden that base. And really, you may be able to find some diamonds in the rough here so that they can, again, expose them to some different elements. Next slide, please, Brian.
Can I just jump in real quick and say,
yeah, please.
This is another one that plays into the lack of, or the challenge of staffing. Let's say that I'm going to use the first name I see on my screen is Wendy. Okay. Let's say that we identify in our organization that Wendy is going to be our debris manager. Well, that's not her full-time job. Wendy is involved in solid waste collection. Okay. And she has to maintain everybody keeping up with the normal trash route. Well, so we've got a disaster that shows up, and Wendy now has a new full-time job to do. And this is something that we also see it occur. And then it's a competing battle of can Wendy do her job, her normal job, and now this new disaster job? And you know what I mean? It's a competition across the resources. And later on, I've seen this too. Wendy did such a good job handling the last storm that came in, but now we can't have Wendy doing that. We can't lose her again to another 4 months of debris operations. And that's another thing that you really, I think, have to consider when you're doing what John said, and you're thinking right now, hey, so who on our team can do this? And then what do they do now? And how do you make sure you got multiple people that can get access to that experience so that you broaden that pool? And hopefully, if 2 months from now you need some folks, you've got, because you're going to need more than just Wendy or John or Nick or Brian. You're going to have multiple people that are going to be involved in this process. So
that's a great point there, Nick. Wendy had a full-time job, still has a full-time job, and this is a 24/7, every day of the week type job that you need to recognize is a significant draw on that individual's focus or that team's focus. So again, identification, super, super important. Brian, next slide, please. So training, what can we do now? Bring in some contracted assistants. Again, bring everybody together doing a training, that crash course, supplement the internal resources with clearing, collection, monitoring, EOC, documentation support, making sure that those are all functional areas. Again, if you've got that white blank Word doc on the left side, how can you fill in all those boxes if you were to say who's going to be doing what within your organization? Is it through mutual aid or leveraging other jurisdictions through the STAR request process? Again, that was something that is out there and you got to learn more of, because again, that can really help be that force multiplier within your other organization. Pull other organizations like departments, like other areas outside the region. Tremendous way to help staff a large operation. Next slide, please. So, I know who can do what. Making sure that the key stakeholders are in the debris operations through staff and contractors, have those procurements in place, testing the system to make sure that it's done, having backup systems in place. All those things are really, really integral into the operation. One thing I thought of this morning preparing this is having some dashboards and the importance of being able to report up. We talk about elected officials, new elected officials who are just thirsty, they're hungry for information. Having a dashboard presentation, something that shows progress. We have a phrase within our organization when you're reporting progress, a slide without numbers is a day without sunshine. Not my line, but a line that has been used on me before. And again, people are hungry for numbers. And in this day and age, our we've got some great numbers out there. I did see in the chat a question about AI, and we'll get to that in some of the communications pieces. But places that AI and ML, machine learning, are integrated into the debris operation are really on the fraud detection side. Some of the data that's in there, and so that's a big one. Chatbots is a big one as well. We're just starting to see AI and machine learning being integrated into the damage assessment process. Not quite there yet, but again, 3 areas that it could be integrated into. Next slide, please, Brian. Again, as I said, communication and letting people know that they're appreciated. Again, write this one down. One of the things I've seen that's done really, really well is challenge coins, thank you notes, all those sorts of things are super important to make sure that we are, again, managing up with good information, as I said, when it comes to reporting, but then just making sure they'll come back the next time, making sure that your team that you've been working hand in hand so closely with are going to be there for that next operation, because maintaining that institutional knowledge is just such importance. Next slide, Brian. In addition, when you're talking about human capital and you're talking about the team that you're working with, again, human capital being the people, is understanding that you need to consider stress levels in this operation. Disaster recovery work is extremely stressful. There are ways, and there's a lot of people who are adopting protocols to help reduce that stress, because there's a lot of burnout. And again, switching jobs, giving some time off, those are, even offering comp time. I mean, that knowing that there's going to be some payment on the end of this are all ways to do it. Allowing breaks and scheduling that overlap. When we're talking about training new people, we got to make sure we're keeping the people trained that we have. So, I mean, we've seen it a tremendous amount in debris management operations. Next slide, please. I believe we're wrapping things up here. Excellent. So again, when we talk about the people side of this, we've seen it so many times. People aren't expecting it. People aren't familiar with debris management. And as part and parcel of it, the people on the debris side are also going to need some support from contractors. And so with this, I'll turn it over to the guys to talk about finding and maintaining those good contractor relations.
Awesome. Let's go to the next slide. I think Brian and I are both doing this one together. So I'll start with this. One of the biggest questions that we see from municipalities in trying to look at the contracts for resources that they may need in a disaster. The first question is usually, where do I get a contract from, or how do I get it? What do I need to do? Not everybody has great purchasing departments or numerous purchasing experts to rely on, or staff who know exactly what needs to go into some of the contracts that you might need in a disaster. And so what I'd like to say is there are a lot of resources out there. There are resources from your neighboring communities. If you know some other staff that you work with there, you can ask, hey, what kind of contracts do you have? Or take use the documents, copy or make your own. Look at good scopes of works and ask around, because I know there are great public examples out there, and there's a lot of people that will help point you to really good resources. What I would say on contractor procurement is, here's some good examples. We're talking about disaster debris and disasters that typically are going to be FEMA, reimbursable by FEMA. And we want to make sure that those are contracted resources that are going to be compliant with federal regulations. And so you want to make sure that you've gone through a proper procurement process to do that. That would be a competitive bid process, looking at scope of work items that are for disaster debris or disaster resources, and that you've thoroughly documented the process and your decision making. Some of a bad example would be, hey, my brother-in-law or my cousin has a company. He picks up landscaping debris. He's got a truck and a trailer, and I think he'd be really good. He or she'd be really good for this project that we have coming up. That's, terrible. You want to stay away from that sort of thing. You really want to stay away from just using someone else's contract or miscellaneous. You don't want to take a tree trimming landscape contract and then expect them that they're going to pick up 1 million cubic yards of debris in your community and take it to final disposal, but first they're going to reduce it. All those technical things that you're going to have to deal with. So you want to make sure you're really procuring the right types of qualified services. There's a lot of good companies out there that this is what they specialize in, and those are the types of people that you want to expect to be responding to these RFPs. Brian, do you have maybe some other examples to help with that scenario?
Yeah, and we've seen this quite a bit actually, where the bad example, my brother-in-law has a truck, and we've actually seen that happen. And then people get de-obligated of funds and has to go to the they'll get told they have to start completely over with trying to find a contractor when you're in the heat of battle, dealing with the disaster. So you certainly don't want to have to deal with that. So the whole idea is to, be careful, go through the proper procurement guidelines in getting the bid in place. Doing it early before there's a disaster is really ideal. So there's less stress involved, and you're able to negotiate and potentially get some better rates. So, but yeah, so it's just I have a lot of clients I've dealt with, and they want to try to use their local people, which is great. But it's the idea is to make sure you get someone who's qualified to do the work, and who has the experience and the equipment that's needed to get the job done properly, and that you also follow those procurement standards so you'll be sure to get properly reimbursed for those eligible expenses.
Exactly. So let's go to the next slide. That kind of brings us to some of the good examples that we wanted to talk about. And the first one we'll start with is qualifications and experience based. And what we mean by that is specifying in your bid documents that you're going to have, a committee of peers in your agency that are going to score and select vendors based off of things that include other qualifications other criteria, I should say, other than just price. Okay, so if you want to move away from low price, contracts, or just basically going with the cheapest bid on one of these advanced debris removal type of contracts, then incorporating criteria and scoring methodology that looks at their qualifications, their ability to perform that type of work, and their experiences. And that allows you to check, references, follow up on those references. That's one of the main points we have in terms of good recommendations is checking what a contractor has done before and what the other communities will say about that. I'd also say using up-to-date bid items and specifications, because as we know in the FEMA disaster world, things change, rules change, guidance changes, best practices change. And so, if you find yourself needing to procure these types of services, what we wouldn't suggest to you is go find an example of an RFP that was bid 10 years ago. That wouldn't be very good. Look for more recent things, or ask for recommendations and thoughts from the industry on what is current, what types of things, how to do bid items, because it's really important that your community or whoever is going to be in charge of this program, you really have to understand the bid items, the descriptions, the scope of work that you're asking someone to do. Because if you don't, you could get yourself in a pickle and paying for things that you don't really understand what the steps were, or what that process was, and how the pay items work. What other things can we talk about? We talked about including factors other than the price. Oh, consider, this is a recommendation of a good example to you all in your community. Just consider your risk tolerance in terms of low bid selections. Hey, some smaller communities, if you think you're not going to have a lot of debris, or your disaster risk is lower, you might say, hey, we're fine with low bid, as long as I would say is it's from a reputable company, and not just somebody who just doesn't have the capacity to do this type of work. But in the urban, especially I think in the urban environment or larger communities, especially in our HGAC region, you really want to look at qualifications, capability, and experience, and move away from just low bid selections. The reason for doing that is just being able to consider and make purchasing selections based on things other than just price. Okay, because that may be really important for the needs in your community. And the last one I think is ranking your contract awards. So it's pretty common in our industry that folks will have debris removal contracts that have a primary vendor, a secondary vendor, sometimes a tertiary vendor. I would say the primary, and my colleagues would probably agree, a primary vendor and then a backup, so a secondary, is really the industry standard. And what that means is, if you identify someone as primary and they do not meet your satisfaction, or they fail to perform, or they just don't come to you at all, which is very, very rare, you then have a secondary vendor who you have vetted and are not, and have someone else to go to. And that's just pretty much the standard. So again, looking at to make sure you've identified that. I have seen some contracts where there are multiple vendors, and quite frankly, no one knows where they stand. They have 3 to pick from, and we've seen some challenges pop up when contractors don't know where they stand. And if they don't know where they stand with you, and then you're going to spend, let's say, a week or 2 weeks to make that decision, guess what? They're going to go to where they know they have the work. And you have to consider in these events, resources may be in high demand, and people aren't going to just kind of sit around with you and wait for, well, I might get this job, even though they already have a contract. So again, just looking at making sure you have identified contractors, good contractors, and then that you have, a primary and a secondary are really good practices. Let's go to the next slide. So the pre-event activities, okay, we talked a lot about, we hit on this some in the staffing piece, right? So your focus, I know some of you are writing down those notes, like I need to call Joe because Joe's going to be involved in debris, and Kim is going to be the deputy on this project. What would be the next thing? It's really looking at pre-event meetings, trainings, making people familiar, getting that team, to webinars like this, or to conferences for the exposure, things like that. But also really having the meetings with your vendors. Let's assume that you already have these contracts in place. So bringing them together, making that phone call. Hey, debris contractor, I want you to come to town and let's talk. And I want to bring in the other departments that are going to be involved in this thing. And we want to have just a training session, a presentation. Doesn't have to be all day, couple, hour to 2 hours is fine. We see that pretty frequently in our industry. And everybody is very open to doing so. And it's not something that costs you a lot of money, or really shouldn't. It's just bringing people together. So conduct those training and exercises. I know we had some poll questions about that we'll probably get to. This, I would say, is very, John, or Brian, you guys would probably agree and help me out on this. in
Absolutely.
our facilities that have like the emergency management people, that set of folks is highly skilled at training. Like those people are always on top of the training and the exercises. I would say in this conversation we're talking about a lot of times it's not the OEM or the emergency management that's driving debris pickup operations, right? And so that's sort of the group that we're talking about, like getting them training, exercises, and coordinating with the other departments that are going to have an interest here. Okay, and that can include your public officials' offices or the public health type, folks in your community and things like that. So
it is, Nick, and this is a great way to have that scenario-based discussion of who needs to go where and when. As Nick pointed out, this is certainly something that is part and parcel to our industry. Everyone really has seen the value of it. So don't be afraid to ask. There's a really well-worn path. A lot of folks have presentations that they have done before. Maybe they have an agenda that they've used before or a strategy to send invites out. All those things, ask for help. And putting something like this together can really go a long way into just shaking hands with someone, sitting around the water cooler, having a cup of coffee, whatever you want to call it, and just talking it out with them. What may be happening, who's going to be there, again, helps you, and it helps the vendor on the other side build that level of comfort and trust, and really put you on a good path, a road to recovery.
And I would just say that, if you've had to activate a debris operation, you've probably got a lot of other issues you're dealing with as well. Emergency management may be trying to set up pods, to issue food and water and that kind of thing, and ice. There may be lots of other issues going on. Maybe some of your infrastructure's damaged. So having that training and exercises kind of helps people understand how it all fits together. So whatever you do for debris management planning also has to fit in with the rest of your incident command structure, and how you're going to work together to make all this work, how you're going to combine your communications, your public information messages and all that together, so that the community can work together to recover as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. And before we move on, I would just say on this one, to highlight the importance of that last bullet, the best, or really the smoothest and the least amount of headaches in terms of a debris removal big project that I've seen in the HGAC region has really been where the people involved have talked and planned and coordinated well in advance. Like they know each other, they know the role. We've talked about the plan, and those things really help and just, make the disaster response a whole lot easier. Should you have that pop up in your community. So with that, let's go to the next one and start to talk about, what happens when it's time to mobilize those contractors or the resources that you have procured. One of the biggest things we see is, okay, so if you haven't done this before, then now you're looking at that contract and you're trying to figure out, so who do I call? Who's my vendor? How do I get a hold of them? How do I issue an NTP or, an authorization for them to do work? I know that I need these resources. I just haven't been through the process and I'm not sure what to do. Okay, so you might be looking at, talking to your purchasing department, figuring out, then going to the company and calling or emailing, hey, I need you in my town now, and I need to speak with you. We need to get this project running. So one of the things that pops up is really the resources, especially when multiple communities in the area have been impacted, and we know that the amount of resources that will come and can help pick up or clear streets is going to be in high demand. So one of the things we thought we'd talk about is, how do you know what you need? how do you know when enough is enough, and how do you know what's really too many? And the best way to do this is to ask your vendors, so how many trucks, and not just trucks, but what type of equipment can you bring me now? How many cubic yards can you haul in a day, as opposed to just how many trucks? Okay. Because a truck can come in various capacity, and most of the hauling resources that we see in the industry are going to be either a very large container like the 18-wheeler box that you see on this screen, or sometimes even a double barrel truck is what we call it, where it's a truck like that and then a trailer behind it with almost the same carrying capacity as that truck. So in those scenarios, you're talking about some equipment that can move over like 100 cubic yards in one time, and move that off your right of ways to a disposal site. So it's really understanding how many of those big boxes can I get, and how many times can they fill that up in a day? That might be 3 times, that might be 4 times. It's probably not 5 times, but 3 to 4 is going to be really good. And making those turns. And so if you can imagine, if I can get some trucks like that, and if I think back to, well, what is my public works or my solid waste, how much debris can we put in just the dump truck they have? And you'll find, maybe there's a 15 cubic yard dump truck. So you could get, double, triple, almost quadruple the productivity out of small equipment with the bigger equipment. And that's really what we're emphasizing, is this is what you want to come into your community to work. And you want to know how much capacity overall, how much debris can we move in a day? And folks can help you. We can model that out. We can look at, well, if you have this many trucks and this much capacity, and you can make this many loads in a day, then we can estimate, how long is this going to take to move and dispose of that debris? For my Brian or John, do y'all have some other like examples where you've seen this come into play? I know one thing. I think the last question on our slide was, so how do you know if you need more than one contractor? Because we talked about the contracting. We talked about it's typical to have, multiple vendors. So at what point do you know if you need 2? How do we know that?
That's a great question, and that is a question that that has been asked multiple times by a lot of elected officials, because 1's great, but 2 could be even better, it'd be twice as good. That's not always the case. That sometimes 2 can be, twice the productivity, but it could be
twice the management. Yeah, twice the problems,
management,
twice the challenges, twice the capacity of your organization just to keep up with that, right? I mean,
but it is one of those things when you do understand how big is big and how bad is bad. We saw the question in the chat, how do you estimate debris? And I'll tell you, estimating debris is a really, really tough activity, because you're dealing with people and their behaviors and impacts of the disaster, understanding how much got impacted, how much didn't. But there are some ways that you can that have improved and have gotten better, but a lot of it has to do with understanding your GIS, understanding what type of event it was. Was it a wind event? Was it a water event? But that I guess we could teach a whole class on debris estimation. But yeah, we'll get into a little bit more detail on debris estimation here in a little bit. But is more than one contractor needed? Really, that's up to the jurisdiction. And but what I would say is to really don't jump into that without some careful consultation with departments such as legal department and your emergency manager, even the state or FEMA in some cases, because there are a lot of considerations that you may have to bring into the discussion as to why you're going to make that change, again, depending on what your contract looks like and all those sorts of things.
Absolutely. So with that, let's go on to the next slide, which is going to be a little bit more on these response and recovery considerations. So in thinking about the resources and what is going to come to your community, we want to talk about establishing the realistic timelines, the expectations, and the cost based on those estimates. So let's start with that. Okay, so we know we have a lot of debris in our community. We know we've got a contractor who's here meeting with us. We're going to ramp up the equipment that is coming into town. We're using our force account resources as well. And then what we need to do is to make a plan amongst all those resources and talk about, so how long is this going to take? What else do we need to complete this job in a reasonable timeline in our community? And that's really, there's no straight answer. It could be, a month is what you want to have the job done in your community, or 2 months. The next one down the road might be a city, and they are really dictating just a much faster schedule. But you also have to deal with the fact that, as John said, when we talk about estimating, the debris that is going to be in your right of way or in the eligible space that you're going to manage is going to be mostly from the residential, from the community, yes, some of it is going to be deposited in your right of way from just the storm itself. So trees fall over, they're in your roads, they need to be cut up and they need to be hauled off. Okay. But in the residential areas, you're going to have more trees and the backyard trees and the fences, and you're relying on the people to bring that stuff to your right of way for management. And so that can take time, especially with things in backyards. Really takes a lot of time. Things that we're going to talk about later that are the social issues or social concerns in those communities can take more time, like elderly folks, lower income folks, people who will it just takes time for that debris to come out. And so you're going to hear that a lot in working in these situations, because a lot of it will be time-based challenges and considerations. So that's that. I know we had the question about, so how do you make an estimate? And there's various, number one, there's models that, if you see me kind of shaking my head about models, there's models we can look at, and those are really good, but it won't really tell you exactly how much debris you as the manager might have to deal with. And so that's what we mean by like a realistic estimate. And what dictates that is, how urban is your community? How much debris might go to private disposal? And so we try to estimate some of that. What's the average debris volume in cubic yards that we might see from some of the residential areas? And so looking at the population and the amount of homes in your community, and applying some thresholds and metrics to say, well, okay, so maybe that's 5 cubic yards per house in the community, and kind of verifying that with some windshield or ground truthing, and come up with an estimate. And usually, it's going to be plus or minus 20 to 25% within the community. So doing anything like that, I would say it's really important early on to, push those estimates of damages and debris, and even costs up the chain through your EOC, to TDM, and ultimately to FEMA, to help get that recovery effort and the reimbursement or funding amounts coming in. The last one here is establish who will run the show. So again, thinking about what departments are going to play here, but also who's the lead, and establishing the lead department as well as like the lead program manager, knowing who the decision maker is for things that will come up. And that is a really good best practice to implement. All right, next slide. This one is understanding the different needs and response and equipment that might be dictated by the type and the severity of an incident. Okay, so for example, Obviously, Beryl was a large windstorm hurricane event in our community. There wasn't a lot of flooding. So most of when we talk about the debris stream, for the most part in Beryl, it's mostly vegetative, tree debris. And that material can be, managed, reduced at temporary disposal sites, and then go to beneficial use, mulching facilities or to landfills as cover for them in their operations, things like that. The C&D debris, or the construction and demolition, for the most part from Beryl, is going to be the structure damage and from fencing. So we see a lot of fence in most of the projects in the region. The C&D material has mostly been picket fences, okay? And that stuff isn't ground up. It just goes straight to a landfill. It isn't mixed into mulch or anything like that. So obviously that's something to consider in your debris plan or in your community, is what types of events are we planning for? The floods like Harvey obviously was a different type of event, different type of damage, different type of debris stream altogether. Next slide. More about the response and recovery considerations. So you really want to have a full service approach and what we mean by that is from the right of way, from the road clearing or emergency push to debris management site operations. So establishing those DMSs, we've stressed that a lot in some of our previous meetings and webinars, identifying sites that are capable of, storing that debris and reducing it, managing it, removing things from the right of way, and then to final disposal. And so all of those things have to be in your debris contract for removal assets. You really want to have all of those things together in the scope of work. You would not want to, necessarily piecemeal them amongst various contracts. If you can just have them all together under one contract umbrella. Next slide. Brian,
one thing I would just add here is that when you're doing your planning, we try to take a regional kind of approach to see what all is in, particularly for disposal. What are the landfills that are available? What are the recycling options? You may be planning on one particular landfill, but in some cases, and this has happened in the Houston area, where a particular landfill may not be available. Maybe the road is washed out to that one particular one. So that's not an option anymore. So what are your other options? What's the next closest? Or, will they work with you? So it's kind of looking at a regional approach to your options as far as disposal, recycling. Do you have some places that can take the wood chips, that can use it and recycle it instead of just putting it in the landfill. So anyway, just looking at those options kind of in a broad aspect, just to make sure you've considered all those different circumstances.
That's a great point. And I would say as well, this is something big to consider. What is an acceptable reduction method in your community? And what I mean by that is grinding mulch at a DMS as opposed to burning debris at a DMS as a proper reduction. And there are ways to properly burn debris. So what we usually see is that in the urban areas, the communities typically don't want to burn. Like if I say burning, it's like saying a 4-letter word. Okay. That's just the reality we're in. But in the outlining areas, it actually is pretty common. It's allowed by the state. I mean, like I said, you're not doing something illegal. It's just reducing that debris stream. And this is important because it really will determine, where does the final debris go? Where does this final material go for disposal? And in processing large amounts of vegetation debris, like if you look at our communities right now, what will happen is the mulch facilities become saturated pretty quickly from the amount of vegetative debris. So, this is important. If you're out in areas that are farther away, you might want to consider, hey, maybe I should burn some of this, assuming, just eliminating nuisances and minimizing air quality and stuff like that. Because if you're the last one holding a bunch of wood chips and you can't get it, you can't find a mulching facility that has capacity to take it. And by the way, all of that stuff, there's always tipping fees and disposal costs. Then you could be impacted by being the last one to that party, and we never want to see that. So just it is important to consider where all of this debris will go, both in a temporary standpoint, where it can be reduced, and where it will go to final disposal. What the landfill, let's move on to the next slide. What the landfill cost would be, and how much capacity those facilities have. This one is really looking at, okay, so we've talked about resources, we've talked about how to look at contracting, and let's talk about what do you do if you have a contractor who has problems or has problems performing, okay, and isn't meeting your expectation. So one of the things that you can do in your contracting process is look at, language for liquidated damages or penalties. But you do need to have a process for establishing what those are, making sure that a contractor is aware of that during the bidding process so that they price or have the ability to price and discuss those things or present them accordingly in the bid. And then specifying what those are and how you would get to the point of actually enforcing the requirements or penalties or liquidated damages in that contract. So it is pretty common. We obviously all hope that no one ever has to get to that point, but at the end of the day, you are paying someone for a service and to perform, and that is an acceptable, enforcement mechanism or having teeth in the contract to enforce the scope and the requirements that you have set. And one of the best things I think to talk about in terms of how to stay away from those situations is really communication. It's having daily meetings to begin with, daily coordination meetings. Those are meetings that everybody in are representatives from the overall program would all discuss. They talk about priorities, the expectations, discuss and resolve issues, talk about the work that was completed in that same day, as well as what is happening tomorrow. What is happening 2 days from now? What's the plan for the next week? And in a lot of times that's not going to change day to day when you're doing it every day. And then you can get to a point where, hey, maybe we don't have to chat about this every afternoon. We move to every 2 days or start spreading out the frequency. But it is really important to communicate what are the problems? What are you hearing in your community that need to be addressed? Those could be from your residents, they can be from your the people above you in your leadership, and they can also be from your elected officials. And at the end of the day, everybody wants to work together as a team to eliminate those, make the problems go away, make everyone happy. But you also have to understand that you will never make everybody happy in your community. And it is what it is. You're always going to get the complaints. You're always going to hear more about the bad things or the complaints, or you missed my pile, you haven't been down my street, even though you actually have, things like that. And it almost is nonstop. Next slide.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. I can't express to you how important those daily meetings are, whether it is through a one-on-one type of situation, which me personally, I'm a hugger. No, I really am not. But I am a person who likes to be there one-on-one. I just want to make sure you guys are listening. I want to make sure that you do have that opportunity to sit down face to face. Again, if you need to do the teams meeting, and really take control of the situation and really take control and work with your contractor. This is not a set it and forget it type of, the rotisserie chicken of disasters. Okay. You got to really work with this program and really get in there to make sure that you have a successful program alongside your contractor. So we're at the halfway point. We've been going an hour, which is flown by. We've got 2 more sections, one on social media, one on communication. We're going to spend, oh, sorry, not social media, social vulnerability, excuse me, and then on communications. I think Nick was ready to jump in there, but I did want to take a moment to go over the poll. And Aaron, you asked a question. What's the poll questions look like? We've gotten, the poll ended. It ended with about 10 out of the 38. So I don't know if you can redo the poll, but we did get the fact that, you know, over 50% of the people have worked in more than 2 disasters. A lot of folks, again, 50% know where their plan is and are familiar with their plan. That was the second poll question. I like, you know, we reset it. So it's back on the clock. All right. So, hey, get your, hopefully everybody can see it. Brian, can you see the poll?
I can.
Okay. Hey guys, let's just take a quick timeout.
And I just wanted to say to the co-host, don't hit any buttons because y'all have the ability to shut it down. So
I think she's saying that I did it. I think
I don't know. I don't know why it shut down earlier. We were thinking that could have been what happened. So
it could have been. That was very kind of you not to throw me under the bus there. So again, we got 45 people on today's presentation. We've been right there. We appreciate every single one of you being a part of today's presentation. So if you wouldn't mind, my hands are up in the air. Aaron, I promise I'm not touching your poll. If you guys wouldn't mind answering these quick 5 questions, and then that'll help us again integrate this into the future projects and then even today's presentation. While you guys are looking at this, I want to look at the questions. You guys ask us, has anybody been successful in utilizing AI or artificial intelligence in debris management planning? So I'll talk about the debris management operations, and then Brian, you could talk about the planning piece. But in operations, we've seen it, AI and kind of that machine learning used in damage assessment. There's some cool tools out there that people are talking about and integrating, especially in flood zones and in some of the other areas using before and after imagery. There are a lot of satellites out in the, you know, stratosphere or toposphere or whatever in the air, and they're always taking pictures. So you can actually, people are looking at, you know, before and afters and some really high res type stuff. So they're teaching AI for that. The other way AI is being used is chatbots. We've seen AI be used in chatbots for call centers or electronic messaging, automated messaging. And then AI, there's one more place, the AI, in fraud and data collection. So yeah, everything from, you know, learning how to look for fraudulent, you know, times and fraud on load ticket data, pinging IP addresses, all those sorts of things. That's kind of where we're seeing the AI and ML integrated. So Brian, anything to add on the debris management planning for AI side?
Well, what I have seen, I've seen some demonstrations on the planning side, particularly like in exercises, coming up with scenarios. I've even seen it used to create like a fake news broadcast about events that were happening and how people were reacting to it. There are some amazing things that are being done with AI. I am not the expert, but I've seen some things that are being used, like particularly in the training aspect and coming up with those scenarios and training and where that could be useful in preparing for incidents.
You know, I was going to say, and it's going to kind of lead into the communications, which is the fourth section, is using those chat GPTs, those language modules, to help with things like, hey, I got to provide an update. It can help you get the bones of that to an elected official. Hey, I have to speak to an angry mob. How can I do that? Put it in that chat GPT, or I need to do a press release on this type of event. And it can really provide you with a really good starting point to that you as the expert have to edit. So we've seen it in those ways. The debris estimate, again, like I said, sometimes a little bit more art than science, but leaning on things like the GIS data, leaning on folks just putting eyes on things, doing aerial surveys before and after. All those sorts of things can help with the debris estimation process. And then finally is on debris disposal. And Nick, I know that's been a big part of this. Before we get into social justice and vulnerability, you want to just touch briefly on that right there?
On debris disposal, I need you to help me out a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was understanding that final debris disposal must comply with environmental regulations, local and EPA. How to better understand that issue?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that's important in your community is to track where debris is going. Okay. We call that monitoring. You might be doing it yourself. You might be doing it with another contractor that you have. But where debris is picked up in the right of way and goes to, let's say it goes to a DMS site for management, it needs to be tracked, and it needs to be make sure that that's going to permitted facilities. So usually FEMA, when they're here and they're talking to you about the disaster, the FEMA environmental folks on a call or in the room will say, I want to talk to you about where that material is going. Was it a permitted DMS site by TCEQ? And you want your answer to be yes, and you want to have that permit on hand to give them eventually. The agencies will also inspect those sites, so that's another aspect of that environmental consideration. The last piece is going to be, it's probably being reduced. It might be staged there and you're reducing that debris volume with your contractor, and then it's going to leave the site and go to final disposal. There are some different options for final disposal. For mulch, it could be mulching facilities that are permitted. So that's another catch. It can go to beneficial use like land application, but there's extreme catches for that. And TCEQ will give guidance or even approve those facilities. So like ag farms and things like that, open areas where you can use mulch to restore soil, okay? As well as landfills. And so in the landfill debris, you always want to make sure it's a permitted landfill. The biggest thing is to make sure that everything is permitted wherever that material goes, or that it's approved by the state as well. And those are the biggest things. I hope that answered your question.
Nick, one more question that came in as you were describing this is composting for vegetation. Truly through composting routes and composting in markets. You want to talk a little bit about that and the vegetative debris stream? Yeah.
So when we said mulching, that's kind of what we meant. So in most of the debris contracts, and you may have this one already, there should be a contractor line item for reducing the vegetative debris at a DMS site. And sometimes you might have a pay item that's also for the management of that temporary debris management site. And so when we say that's where they're grinding the vegetative debris to reduce it, because as you all know, we can't just take all the debris stream and go take it to a landfill. Reducing it helps to save landfill space and also basically recycle that vegetative product. So when we say mulching or go to a mulching facility, that could be a composting facility as well. And those facilities need to have permits from the state. They may also need a permit from your local municipality, your city or your county, what have you. And I know that fire marshal's offices usually are really particular about those sites because everything that's there can catch fire, and you've seen those things be on the news. They're very hard to put out. So again, where we talk about that reduced vegetative product is commonly referred to as, like, we'll say wood chips or the mulch, because it's freshly shredded. It's going to be mulch, but it's shredded wood chips at the moment, and then it can go to mulching / composting facilities. It can go to beneficial use sites. Sometimes the landfills will take it because they want to use it for their daily cover or landfill cover benefit. And so that's another example.
So one more question here. So no debris classification applies to these kinds of projects?
Debris classification, can they speak or clarify? I don't know.
Oh, that's what I was hoping to. I wasn't quite sure. I'll tell you what, let me get into this. If you wouldn't mind clarifying that question, and then we'll get back to it. But let's go into social vulnerability and social justice. So next slide, please. So when we talk about this, really, we talk about it in terms of the Executive Order 1289 or 12898, EO 12898, of environmental justice. This was passed, or it was executed back in 1994, and it really focuses and requires on those federal agencies to identify and really address those impacts to disproportionately high or on minority and low income populations as a result of their actions. And so over the last several years, especially back in 2021, 2023, we saw a lot of reports that have been published from organizations like EPA and FEMA that were really highlighting this. Next slide. And so FEMA started taking a look and publishing a lot of information on the idea of social vulnerability. And when we talk about this, is that we talk about this from the perspective that there are certain social groups that are naturally, again, going to have a greater impact from natural disasters that are disproportionate to other groups that could be in death, in injury, and loss, disruption, economic. It's just part and parcel of their livelihood. This was certainly discussed, moreover, in 2020 when you discussed COVID-19, but really we've known this, and it's certainly been a part of the disaster process. And so FEMA came out with the FEMA National Risk Index website, and you can see the URL right there. If you click on the link, it looks very similar to the map right here, but you can see the relatively high concentrations and very high concentrations that are within the state of Texas. And so these ratings have been developed that represent the community's level of social vulnerability. So you look at an area like Rolling Fork, Mississippi. There was a small speck, tiny place on the map, and it was impacted by a series of tornadoes in April of 2023, which is just about 18 months ago. And you certainly saw there that it was in the lower socioeconomic areas that's really where the deaths occurred. That could have been in some cases because, and again, citing the FEMA study here, and really we worked and served that area, but we did see some of those mobile homes were not wind rated, were not able to get to a tornado shelter, which was many, many miles away. So 26 people died there, and certainly is a great example, or an unfortunate example, of this event. Next slide, please. So when we talk about SVI, or the SOVI index, the social vulnerability index, what do we mean here? So we look at the overall vulnerability of the population, and it's broken down to those first four categories: socioeconomic, the household, race and ethnic, minority status, and then housing type and transportation. And so we see this applied to a lot of different federal programs now, and especially to be taken into consideration for debris management. You look at the socioeconomic statuses, housing cost burden, lower income populations, aging population, 65 and older, or younger population, those with disabilities, English proficiency challenges, the racial and ethnic minority status, and then the type of housing or their access to vehicles. And those types of issues will impact their ability to get debris to the right of way. Okay, there's a challenge for them and how much debris is been generated by their particular home or residence or their location. But then just getting that tree in the backyard is not going to be a couple of day thing. It's going to be a couple of week thing. And those weeks are going to be turning into a couple of month thing. And then that tree is just going to be part of their property. And that's what we want to say is that when it comes to debris operations, you have to really think of, or you have to consider the ability for the varying degrees of population and understanding what they can provide and what they can provide you to have a successful debris operation, because it takes two to tango, right? It takes them getting the debris out to the right of way and then you bringing the assets in timely fashion to get there. So that's a big challenge. Next slide, please. So this is this SVI index national. You can see the map here. Many areas throughout the state of Texas are ranked, and Harris County is a high SVI area. And really what this translates into, they don't know how these individuals, again, people who are ranked high in this SVI index, a lot of times what we see is they don't know how to ask for help. They may have some government distrust. They may be not as adept with the internet and different websites, things like crisis cleanup. They might not know to log on there to identify their location for needing help. They might not know the debris hotline and how to call that they need assistance. They may not know how to sign up for FEMA. These are all real things that do make a difference. And again, we've seen it time and time again. We want to talk about the fact that when you're looking at distributing assets, distributing debris sites, that you take these things just into consideration. Next slide, please. Here are some great examples of environmental justice concerns that it could be. The hauling, the debris burning, you heard that from Nick earlier, road repairs, closures, closing public facilities, and looking to mitigate or avoid. But I'll say this, when you are looking at first pass completion, distributing assets, even the duration in, again, higher income areas they have more resources to dedicate, maybe private resources, and aren't waiting for the assistance of a local government to get the debris picked up. And so it may take more time. And so, Nick, I know you've seen that a lot, in some of these projects that you've worked. What are are there some other considerations that you may want to consider in your debris operation?
Thanks, Sean. What I've seen before is the debris project manager who is having to, distribute or work with the contractor on distributing those assets, like John said. So you may have competing priorities. And what I mean by that is everybody in the community wants that truck. Okay. They want that truck to stay in their area. We often tell people this really isn't a trash collection route. Okay. It's not garbage collection. It is moving large quantities of debris. And so what I'm trying to say is you may get, you're going to get complaints from the residents. You may also get complaints from your elected officials because they're representing a community and they're all different communities. And some may represent, only a a well-to-do community, and others only a socially vulnerable community. And so you're going to have to manage those expectations. It's good to get people to buy into a plan, because listen, somebody has to be first, and unfortunately someone has to be last. And what happens is when you split up all those different trucks into areas, that will sort of take you away from a plan of moving across your community. Okay, when you have to start sending a truck to take care of Miss Sally because Commissioner Joe said I have to have somebody on Miss Sally Street today, then you've reallocated that equipment somewhere else. But when it comes specifically to the vulnerable communities, I think what you as the operations coordinator or those managers have to do is to be able to say, hey, we need to make sure that we're also picking up in our most vulnerable or lowest income areas. And that is the best thing to do, even if it means you take some heat from your boss or whatever. Unfortunately, I'm just going to say that, because what you don't want to do is clean up all of your well-to-do areas and then not have resources in those most vulnerable. And like John said, they may not have the most debris in your community. Okay, they just might not. It might not be the worst area in your town from that disaster, but their ability to get resources is always going to be the lowest. And you're not going to see someone getting paid to remove debris. The lawn care company, the landscaper for that homeowner in the low income area isn't going to be able to pay someone to cut up that tree that's really big and move it. Or you also have the elderly to consider as well. And that's not just an income status there. So again, it's just making sure that you talk to, all we're trying to do is say, these are challenges. These are things that these are real world problems, and you're going to have to face them. And your best situation is to make sure you're just knowing where they are, knowing those low income areas, and making sure that you and your resources are in there to assist them. And that's just one of the best things that we've seen over time to talk to people about.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. And goodness, I think you really hit on some really, really key points when it comes to resources and making sure that you have the equitable split of those resources. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we have seen is that we actually have seen FEMA integrate that into some scopes of work and be a real benefit to the community. And so, I mean, and Nick's going to walk you through an example here that occurred a couple of years ago in Florida, and how that has evolved into getting approval for some things that we may have had some challenges with otherwise, especially again with the administration of these programs, making sure that you can integrate the SVI components and into your ask, okay, and then how that reflects a whole community approach to the program that you are implementing, such as a private property debris removal program or a commercial property debris removal program. Those are all, and again, those are kind of higher level debris, but PPDR, again, for those of you who may not be as familiar with it, is the action of a local government going on to assist perhaps somebody elderly, perhaps somebody that is under-resourced, to go onto their property and remove the hazards and get funded through those federal dollars. So again, something to consider as you make your requests and notifications through the state and FEMA. Next slide, please. Yep, this again, again, we want to hit home that in your decision making, okay, hey, remember on that other screen you had there, making sure that social vulnerability and social justice in disasters is integrated. Again, that might be visual and hearing impaired or dual sensory impaired. that might be targeting outreach through different languages. I know that there's new Google language models that are out there. Again, you talk about communication to integrate that into what is going on with your outreach. So next slide, please. And then there's collaboration at every level, okay? That is, again, making it equitable treatment. Again, this is a term that's used a lot, so you may want to write it down. Hint, hint. I feel like that teacher on my kid's junior high 7th grade test. Hey, you might want to write this one down, but it's equitable recovery. Equitable recovery for all individuals is a really important point and important key consideration for you to integrate into your discussions with your federal partners, your state partners. Maybe it is elected officials in how you are implementing your debris management operations, as well as your debris management plan, having that in there, because there is a SVI report that FEMA has asked for and that has been generated following some of these specialized programs and their approvals.
Hey,
So
John,
really important. And now I think,
sorry about the delay, but I wanted to mention you were really instrumental in looking at some of the volunteer resources and those things like Crisis Track. And so if you could just elaborate for a quick minute on that and how you can leverage that type of resource.
Yeah, the Crisis Cleanup is that website that's out there, and you put your address in a need and understanding what that need is, debris removal, and that volunteer organization can kind of come in and grab them and execute that scope of work. I mean, again, there's a lot of different volunteer groups. There's grassroots organizations like a neighborhood men's club, a neighborhood church, all the way up to big national partners that are really out there to assist that individual to whether it's put a new blue roof on, or whether it's to get a tree off their backyard or off their car. And there are some resources out there that are there to help those individuals. And HGAC even has a great pamphlet, a great FAQ, frequently asked questions, or a quick reference card that's on the website that you can provide to nonprofits to help with doing missions like this onto private property and helping with the debris operation. Thanks, Nick. Next slide, please. So this Hurricane Ian, 2022, just 2 short years ago, and I was hobbling around on a broken foot at that point, but Nick was there. It really at ground zero in Southwest Florida. And Nick, can you take a moment to talk about a real world example of how social justice and equity played into their debris recovery?
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm going to try to run you through a recap real quick. So obviously Hurricane Ian was a very large Category 4 hurricane that made landfall Southwest Florida in late September 2022. The storm surge there was really intense. And what I mean by that is, you may know on the news, obviously Fort Myers had like the bulk of the very large devastation, but even throughout the county to the south, Collier County, where Naples and some other inland communities in that county, the storm surge there really impacted the very front of the coastal area, the beaches, and a lot of those communities. Let's go to the next slide. So what we wanted to do is just kind of use this as an example of how we did see demographics come into play from FEMA and social vulnerability and some of those things as well. So I'm just going to show you a couple of photos of kind of what the county looks like, so you get an idea. Boats in the streets, lots of construction and demolition, or basically the flood type debris from people mucking out their homes. A lot of high-rise structures there as well. So people in the second and even some of the third floor residences were impacted, as well as homeowners in the bayfront, or in the bay and the Gulf front areas as well. Lots of down vegetation mixed in with that stuff as well. Next slide, Brian. Here's some more really showing some of the commercial roadway areas, and this became a real problem. The top one is you see a lot of the black bags, which we never know what's in a black bag. Those can be real problematic. Carpet, sheetrock, all that stuff coming out, and unfortunately came into the roadways. It became even worse than this, and a lot of road situations became a traffic hazard. Emergency access and egress was a major concern in those areas, as well as the bottom right picture is a photo of one of the very few burned and destroyed structures in a mobile home community there in Naples. Next slide, Brian. So let's talk about the challenges for a minute. And honestly, these challenges weren't really too far off from things that we see in our own area. So resource logistics in terms of major devastation across Southwest Florida, and a lot of resources to help initially come to an emergency response situation, as well as the recovery. Where people and workers could stay was a problem. The communication was an issue, down power lines, bad cell service or lack of communication with cell phones. The changing workforce, this was one of the first natural disasters following COVID. So it was harder to find people who could work. That was another challenge in the area. And then a lot of misinformation, things on social media, different FEMA guidance, commercial debris, and some FEMA alternative procedures are what we were also going to talk to you about a little bit in this case study. So next slide. This gets into the real issue, especially in Collier County, but it was because of the widespread debris that there was a lot of private gated communities that had debris challenges, as well as the commercial facilities. And in both of those, and by commercial, I mean like apartments, the high-rise condos, those are, sometimes owned by obviously multiple owners, but sometimes one major owner and everything is leased out. So it is more of a commercial facility in that regard, and typically would need to be managing its own debris stream, as well as those from the gated communities. So both of those two examples here were situations that the communities needed to talk to FEMA about, as well as the state FDEM, the emergency management agency there. And it was such a problem that it, quite frankly, it overwhelmed the communities themselves, as well as the municipalities. And it was just became part of the need for really the long-term recovery. It was going to be something that someone had to come in and really start removing and managing that debris. So they all went into discussions with the agencies to go through a process of doing that. The bottom right photo is an example actually of the FEMA coming out to the site. They wanted to inspect a lot of these, which is just something that we have to go through in that process. Next slide. So this is one of the first examples, and I know you can't read the letter, but it's one of the first times that in Ian, or as a result of Ian, FEMA issued guidance to begin to grant waivers for certain debris removal programs. And John kind of mentioned these on a previous slide, but it's the private gated communities and the commercial debris removal aspects. And one thing I would say is on commercial debris, you're really never talking about like a Home Depot, the Walmarts, those types of structures. It's usually when you get an approval for that in the community, it's going to be your smaller businesses, the mom and pops, and those types of structures that typically are less, they are more vulnerable as a business and are not as well to do, so to speak, as obviously don't have the resources as a major corporation. And so FEMA came out and granted, told people what the policies were, what the waivers would be for some of these programs. But, the problem was there was a catch. And so the catch became to be about these social demographics. And it's why we're having this conversation. It required an analysis of certain census tracts. And that's an important word. We get population numbers from the census and the demographics that we may use in our different programs in our community, right? And so it limited some of these approvals to particular census tracts and counties. We haven't seen that happen here in Texas, but it has happened in another FEMA region, and it could happen in the future. And that's part of why we're having this conversation. So in looking at some of the census tracts, there was a categorization of damage level per se. And a lot of this correlated back to the demographics that you would see in like the SVI or the social vulnerability data. And so it created this process where, first of all, some communities were told, hey, these programs can apply in XYZ census tract. It also led to a number of folks asking questions in the state like, well, hey, so what about this census tract? And going through a process of trying to add their other areas by census tract into, into falling into the guidance of the special approvals. And so nonetheless, you probably can tell it complicated things, right? It required a whole lot more analysis and, looking into areas and whether or not it met, really looking into analyzing what made the FEMA go to this census tract determination, and how do I, as a community, do I try to extend this to other areas that I need to deal with? Let's go to the next slide. And ultimately, basically as part of the cleanup, the communities there, they went through this process, and some of them may have decided, hey, I just have to remove debris in these areas and do the best that I can with the guidance that I've been given from FEMA, work within the rules. Sometimes, ideally you're going to get reimbursed for that material, sometimes not, but it is ultimately, part of the cleanup process. So in this example, we're showing, again, a commercial area that was subject to this approval. And you see, kind of an older commercial facility that doesn't have a lot of, financial resources and had a debris problem, and the county or the city came in and removed that material. Also, same situation, bottom right, again, is that burned up mobile home structure that happened to be in a mobile home community that was kind of a commercial area. It was all the roads and streets were privately owned. And so it kind of fell into these programs as well. Next slide.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
So
I'll let John talk about this one.
Yeah. So again, great information about how SVI can be integrated and really help the community recovery, and how that fits into the debris operation. Some other elements, some other acronyms, terms, things that are also a part of this is CEDAR zones, or community disaster resilience zones. You'll see that acronym used a lot. It's in the Building Resilience in Cities, or BRIC program, that is integrated into the decision-making process. If we go to the next slide, please, you can see how prevalent these CEDAR zones, or community disaster resilient zones, are throughout the state of Texas. This is FEMA's map. We actually have, I believe, 9 CEDAR zones here within Harris County. A few more throughout Southeast Texas. You can see the ones there with the Bolivar Peninsula, on into some of the areas on the eastern and northern part of the community. But again, it's something that is, and you can read here on the screen, the benefits of projects in those areas will help, the FEMA will consider higher cost shares for projects in those areas. So we're seeing it in mitigation projects, but again, it might be something to consider if there is a project for you in the other areas. Next slide, please. And finally, LMI. Okay, low to moderate income households. LMI data is a frequently used data set in the HUD programs of the Housing and Urban Development through their CDBG programs or Community Development Block Grant. I want to make sure that this is another area, another way, another data set that looks at some of these vulnerable populations and could be a tool in the tool belt if you try and target some of those areas. Next slide, please. The LMI areas can be or LMI households, making it a priority for the recipients and making sure that they avoid duplication of benefits. You can provide those areas with tips and tools about how to manage disaster assistance funding and find creative strategies to get them involved and employed in the disaster. Next slide. Finally, you have opportunity zones or qualified opportunity zones or QRZs. This was actually the designation that FEMA used in the 2022 example there with Hurricane Ian. This, again, is these QRZs are through the IRS. So everybody has a different acronym, a different way of looking at this, but certainly can all be put together to really help enhance your argument. Final slide. We are now moving into our last segment, last 15 minutes, and talk about public information and tools to enhance those messages. And so now, Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, John. So I preach this a lot about public information because it's really important to get the information out to the public about what's going on and providing them instructions on how to handle their debris, how to separate the debris so the whole process goes much quicker for the community to recover, and so the debris can be picked up much quicker. And so, pushing that information out on a regular basis, giving them regular updates on the status of debris operations is also really important, being realistic with them about it. Monitoring social media, the rumors can just get out of control. And people will see that and get the wrong ideas of what's going on. And so, monitoring that and taking action on it is really important. So making sure that people are getting good information. Collaborate in messaging with other jurisdictions. So everyone's saying a accurate and timely and consistent message is also going to be really important. And then also people are going to be calling in. They're going to want to have information on when's this stuff can be picked up. And they may be calling their elected officials about, complaining about when am I going to get some action here? So providing a number for residents to call for information about the debris operation, as well as other aspects of recovery, can be really important to kind of help dispel some of those rumors and provide good information to the public. And sometimes even a contractor can provide some of that assistance in manning those phones if you wanted to do it that way. So I wanted to be sure and let you know that HGAC has some really good public information tools to help. And so there's a link there where you can find that information. There's some message templates by phase of response. So based on where you are in the recovery process and the debris operation, there's some messages there that can help you, that you can just make a few tweaks and push those out so you can get messages out fairly quickly after a disaster. There's also some guidance on the establishment of a call center. We've had some experience in putting those together and operating those, and just some helpful tips in putting those together. So that's on the site as well. There's also some graphics to help communicate the message regarding separation debris, safety, and other messages. And I'll show you some of those in just a second. And then the messages are available in different languages. And then also that's available in different formats to accommodate, different, so like Facebook has one format, it's more of a rectangle. I think Instagram is more of a square. Anyway, there's different formats that you can use to share the message. So here's one you've probably seen a lot of. It's the separating your debris. So it provides the information on how to separate the debris from normal household debris, vegetative debris, construction demolition, appliances and white goods, electronics, and then household hazardous waste. So the idea here is push that message out, separate the debris. All the trucks come through, they may pick up one type of debris and take it to a separate place. And so pushing that information out, some people will actually follow the directions, some people won't, but getting their cooperation can really help make the process of debris collection and recovery go much quicker. And then some other graphics that have been developed to help communicate the message. So this one is one that was developed that explains the debris operation timeline. So, it can often take several weeks or months to complete. A truck may not pick up all your debris in one load. Several passes may be needed to collect all the debris generated by the disaster. And then, the message that different types of debris may go to different places. So this may help answer a lot of the questions that people may be calling in about. Hey, why did this truck only pick up this? They left all this other debris in my yard. So this kind of helps to address some of those questions that people may have when the debris operation begins, and also help to establish a realistic expectation of the timeline. Another one is about bagging debris. Nick showed a picture in Hurricane Ian showing that some of the bag debris, the debris contractor can't pick up bag debris because they can't see what's in it. They have to know what's in it to be able to pick it up. So just that message about do bag garbage, but don't bag debris is an important message to push out there also during debris operations. Here's another picture, kind of the same thing, just a little different way to show it. But it's an effective way to communicate that, hey, don't bag your debris, do bag your garbage, but not your debris. And then just some helpful information about safety. You have a lot of injuries that occur after a disaster. I mean, doing debris operations is inherently dangerous. So just reminding people about, wearing safe shoes, use puncture-resistant gloves, wear safety glasses, look out for dangerous displaced animals. In some cases, you may have snakes and other insects that may sting or, could be a problem. Never use a generator inside. I used to always get amazed at how many people put the generator in the garage because they're afraid it gets stolen and end up in the hospital or worse. Beware of down power lines of gas leaks. Of course, wearing sunscreen, long sleeves, and then hire a pro if you don't know. You have a lot of people who try to run a chainsaw, have never done one before, and end up getting injured. So again, just a helpful message here. And then, before disaster, if you know something bad is coming, just saying, hey, now's the time to prepare, get those loose items secure, make sure anything that can turn into a projectile is secured, and then, hire a tree professional if you need to trim loose limbs, those kind of things. Schedule bulky waste pickup with your trash collector, just making sure that people have these messages so they can be adequately prepared and get rid of those things that might result in more debris or more damage from a disaster. But these are all available on the HGAC website. So that is. Oh, and then make sure people keep drains clear. Forgot about that one. Make sure that they keep the drains clear. Make sure things loose debris won't end up in the storm drains. So important that don't, if it does get in there, it could result in flooding issues. So making sure they keep the drains clear. But again, all those messages are available on the HGAC website.
Thank you so much, Brian, for those examples. And thanks for HGAC for hosting those on your website. I tell you what, every time I see the HGAC separating your debris graphic out there, it'll be in a random place in Ohio or Idaho or Iowa or some random place, random state. I always text Cheryl Murgo, who's the director there at HGAC, and show it to her. I always get a kick out of it because it is just, it's gone everywhere. And these examples, these these examples that Brian had that are on the HGAC website, I think those are fantastic tools. Being able to push that information out is a great way to do it. And again, you can take those and you can draw inspiration from it. And we certainly encourage that. So one final thing before you head out today, please make sure that you complete your HGAC. That's a message from Wendy here. It's on the jot form. It's actually on the chat. So please have that while you complete your complete your survey in the chat. There was a clarification, Nick. I don't know if you saw it here. There you go. Nick Russo on the case. He responded there.
Yeah,
about
in
debris
short,
classification.
yes, debris is classified. So I was referring back to the HGAC graphic, if that helps. And I would mention there's no, in this type of program, there's no industrial debris. Usually no hazardous debris unless it's your household hazardous type of waste. But and a lot of that it goes back to like your contracting and making sure that what items are in your debris removal contract and that scope of work. So, but yeah.
Awesome. All right, we got another question about vulnerable communities and discussing getting information, or I believe I had mentioned the challenges that you see in getting information out to those areas. Any tips or tricks for getting that information to that particular demographic, those particular areas? We have seen a number of different ways, and Brian, please, and Nick, you guys jump in here too, but certainly distributing material through trusted sources. I've seen some programs, some ways where they've distributed through the Catholic Church in an area or whatever diocese, whatever religion that had a strong tie to the community, using existing channels, using other grassroots organizations has been a great way to reach those individuals, again, in native languages, using those type of services. I mean, again, maybe something as simple as Google Translate, that you get information out to those populations. Brian, any other tips or tricks for reaching a particular population, an area that may not have a good understanding of the debris operation?
Yeah, it's about using any and all tools available. So, of course, social media, the website is a real important tool, of course. I've seen a lot of jurisdictions use reverse 911 type systems. But yeah, when it boils down to it, you've got to get the message out. And so some cases it's door hangers, with volunteers. And if you have some volunteer groups, or like John mentioned, churches, that if there's language barriers, they can help to address that. That's what you have to do too. I mean, I've seen lots of situations where you actually had to go door to door to put the message out there in those areas that were affected. So again, it's just using any and all resources available to get that message out.
Love that. Thank you so much for the question. All right, anybody have any other questions today? Well, this has been great. As we wrap things up here, again, looking at discussing your changes in staffing, we looked at the vulnerable populations, we discussed your contractor and getting to know your contractor and working with your contractor, and finally, communication strategies and integrating those. So we certainly do appreciate it. HGAC is a wonderful resource, a wonderful way to get things done. Brian, thank you for ending with this. It's your photo from South Shores. It always brings it home for me. I'm Lee Greenwood here as we wrap things up. But again, thank you again for being here today. Have a wonderful.
And I just want to.
Oh, sorry, Aaron.
That's okay. Aaron again here at HGAC. I just wanted to I can't think the right word, but also say thank you to everybody for joining us. And yes, the survey is in the chat, so please go ahead and grab that before we shut down this webinar so you can fill that out. And let us know how we did and what topics you want to see in the future. So, all right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.